The babysitter's last text. Who's upstairs? The text came at 9:58 on a wet Friday in early November, the screen lighting the dim kitchen of a craftsman house on Maple Ridge Avenue in the town of Larkspur, Pennsylvania. The babysitter had written only 3 words, spaced as if she had to force her thumbs to move. Who's upstairs? Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from? And what time is it there? Her name was Ione Kestrel, a college sophomore who took evening jobs to pay for studio art supplies and a public transit pass to the city. She was a quiet soul with a quick wit, the kind of person who noticed the way rain made halos around streetlights and the way children's laughter changed when they grew tired. 2 kids slept under that roof that night, a 6-year-old boy named Briar and his 3-year-old sister named Lark. Their parents, Rowan and Maeve Harrow, had left at 7:15 for an anniversary dinner at a restaurant by the river. The year, if you need to understand the way phones hummed and doorbell cameras watched, was 2019. The house at 42 Maple Ridge was one of those old American stories, built in wood and memory, a deep porch with a swing that complained just enough to be charming, oak floors that spoke out loud when the humidity changed, crown molding thick as a picture frame. At the back, a narrow staircase rose from the mudroom to a short landing, and then up again into the second floor where the bedrooms sat in a row like well-behaved children. At the top of the main stairs, there was a crawlspace door that had once led to a linen closet and now led to a barely insulated wedge of attic, hot in summer and sharp with cold in winter, the kind of door that makes a welcome thud when it closes and an unwelcome thud when it doesn't. Before the Harrows left, they did all the small, loving rituals. Maeve set out a plate of sliced apples, a bowl of popcorn, and a note that read, "Help yourself to anything except the scotch." Rowan pointed to the thermostat and said the heat pumps kick on if the temperature dips. Fancy house, but the bones are stubborn. He smiled at Ione in the doorway, hair damp from the drizzle, denim jacket dotted with rain. Text us if the storm knocks the power out. Text us if the kids wake and ask for the song about the lighthouse. Text us even if you think it'll make us look overprotective. It won't. At 7:30, the children were bathed, pajamaed, and nestled into beds that smelled faintly of line-dried sheets. Ione read the lighthouse song twice, and the little girl fell asleep with a hand on the brother's shoulder, a tether strong enough to hold a moon in place. At 8, the dishwasher hummed its modest lullaby. At 8:20, the rain came harder, dropping like a handful of pebbles thrown by a polite intruder. At 8:42, the doorbell camera pinged, announcing a raccoon with ambitions. Ione's phone ticked with messages from a group chat, small bursts of jokes and memes. She answered 2 and then set the phone face down, because she had promised herself she would be the kind of sitter who watched and listened. She put a kettle on. She chose a mug with a hairline crack because hairline cracks reminded her of river maps. She stood at the back window and watched the alley, where a single streetlight blew a cone of yellow onto the wet blacktop like a candle someone had forgotten to snuff. At 9:21, a floorboard spoke upstairs. It was not the sound of a child rolling over and not the polite pop of wood releasing humidity. It was a stepped-on sound, slow and weight-bearing, forward and then a tiny, deliberate back. Ione took one breath, then another. The kettle clicked off. The house returned to its normal choir. She checked the baby monitor screen. 2 small forms slept. The greenish night vision painting dreams onto their faces. She told herself she knew old houses. She told herself wind can make timber say things it doesn't mean. At 9:36, the sound came again, above the kitchen this time, in the hallway between the children's rooms. One step and another. A long pause. Then the faintest scrape, as if someone had scuffed a shoe and then, embarrassed by the sound, tried to rub it out with the sole. The kind of scrape that turns the air thin. Ione lifted the house phone from its cradle because old houses carry old phones like relics. No dial tone because this was 2019 and the landline was a costume. She put it back and picked up her cell. No missed call, no alert from the doorbell camera. She opened the parent's contact, hovered, did not press. First, she would look, she would be careful. She would not give Rowan and Maeve a reason to race home on wet roads unless there was a reason. She climbed the back stairs because they felt less like a stage. Each step was shallow and careful. The rain softened to a hiss. Her breath became a guest she had to host with manners. At the landing, the air grew cooler. She could see down the short hall into the little boy's room, the lighthouse nightlight casting a steerable arc of white. She could see the girl's room door nearly closed, just enough to make a crescent, the way some children like it. She could also see the crawlspace door at the top of the main stairs. It was closed, latch turned. That mattered more than it should have. She waited. Sometimes the house wants to know if you have patience. Sometimes it will reward you with silence. Sometimes it will not. There was a third sound, not a footfall this time, but a breath. Not hers. Not a child's soft, open-mouth exhale, but the kind of breath that pauses at the end like it is tasting the air. It came from the darkness beyond the crawlspace door, except the door was shut. Ione felt the tiny hairs along her forearms confess themselves to fear. She stepped into the boy's room. He slept with his mouth open just a little, lower lip shiny. Good. She stepped to the girl's room. Little Lark had turned onto her stomach, stuffed rabbit tucked under her chin. Good. When Ione moved back into the hall, her eyes caught something at the far end where the light thinned. A strand of damp hair lay across the floorboards, faint as a pencil mark, a single narrow ribbon that did not belong to either child. It glistened. She knelt without thinking and picked it up. Cold. Clean. Long enough to belong to someone grown. She stood up too quickly and steadied herself with a hand on the wall. Her palm pressed into a nail head that had been painted over and sanded down so smooth it felt like a coin. She thought the oddest thought then. If I press that nail in, will the crawlspace door open by itself? She smiled at herself because fear makes even introverts dramatic in their own skulls. She returned to the back stairs, slow and exact, and only when she reached the fourth step from the bottom did she glance at her phone. The time read 9:58. The text she sent herself, as if letting the words exist outside her head could make them smaller, was only 3 words. Who's upstairs? She meant to send it to Rowan. She meant to send it to Maeve. She meant the message as a half-joke with a serious underlayer. But the thumb that had learned to move fast learned the wrong dance. It went to her friend in the group chat, and by the time she realized, the message had already become a tiny flare in half a dozen pockets around town. Her friend replied with, "What are you doing?" and also joking, right? And also put them on speaker. Ione did not reply. She set the phone on the counter face up this time. She took the largest knife from the drawer and then immediately put it back because knives are not courage and courage is not noise. She chose instead a heavy flashlight from the mudroom shelf, the kind that doubles as a hammer. She clicked it on. The beam carved a clean white tunnel along the baseboards. She moved to the bottom of the main staircase now, because if fear wants you to circle, wisdom wants you to cross. The newel post was worn as a handshake. Family photographs climbed the wall. A wedding photograph near the bottom showed Rowan in a blue suit and Maeve in a dress with sleeves that looked like light. Higher up, a picture of Briar in a lion costume, nap-flattened mane, grinning with the sincerity only a 6-year-old can manage. Above that, near the top, a framed landscape. The glass reflected the flashlight beam like a lid. Halfway up, she paused. There was that breath again. Not a cough, not a snore. A breath like someone who had been holding still too long and had to remind their body to keep doing the automatic things. The sound came from beyond the last step, in the shadow to the left, where the crawlspace door Saturday. It was closed, latch turned. She aimed the beam at the brass. The metal showed a fog that had not been there a minute ago, condensation, from a mouth that had exhaled near it. She kept her own mouth shut because you cannot take breath back once it is out. The latch moved. It moved too gently to be gravity. It made the tiniest metal-on-metal sigh. Then it stilled, as if the person behind the door had realized they had announced themselves and decided to pretend nothing had happened at all. Ione's voice, when it came, was not loud. It was firm in the way a music teacher's voice is firm when she asks a child to stop tapping the desk with a pencil. I'm a babysitter. The police are on their way. If you are a neighbor who has made a mistake, this is your chance to leave without me seeing your face. If you are not a neighbor, this is your chance to decide to be one. Nothing moved. But the house did a small thing then. It clicked. A sound traveled through the baseboards from kitchen to parlor like a cricket chirp. The refrigerator compressor had kicked on. The world had not narrowed to only this door. She stepped higher. She brought the beam closer to the latch. She did not touch it. She watched a drop of moisture on the brass slide very slowly toward the handle and then stop, held by a force that did not want to be named. From the children's rooms, nothing. From outside, rain. From down the hall, a draft like someone had opened a mouth to speak and then decided not to. She took the phone, thumb shaking now not from drama, but from the body's strange understanding of scales. She typed 911 and the call went through on the first chime. The dispatcher answered with a first name and a county. Ione told that calm voice her name, the address, the fact of 2 sleeping children, the fact of a locked door with breath behind it that did not belong to the family. The voice said, "Officers are on the way." The voice said, "Stay on the line." The voice said, "Do not open the door." So she did not. She watched it the way you watch a stage when you know the performer is already in the wings. She told the dispatcher every small thing she saw. The latch is fogged. The brass is pitted near the screw head. The paint around the jamb is chipped the way it chips when someone tries to open a door with a butter knife. The dispatcher asked about the kids, and she told her about the lighthouse song because sometimes the answer to a safety question is a story that proves you are paying attention. It took 6 minutes for the first cruiser to roll into the alley, though those 6 minutes ran long like string you cannot find the end of. 2 officers climbed the porch steps, rang the bell softly out of habit, then tried the knob and announced themselves. Ione walked down the main stairs, not taking her eyes from the crawlspace door, unlatched the front door, and stepped back quickly so the officers could enter. Their names were Officer Tamsin Dupre and Officer Hal Moran. They were young enough to still wear the job like a coat borrowed from a bigger relative, and old enough to know when to keep their weapons holstered because children were sleeping. Ione pointed. The hall was framed now by their bodies and the yellow hallway light and the cleaner light of the flashlight. Officer Dupre nodded, raised a hand to let silence accumulate, and then approached the door with a slowness that reminded Ione of a conductor raising a baton before the first downbeat. Dupre put 2 fingers lightly on the latch and did not move it. She bent, eye to the thin seam between door and jamb. She inhaled. She did not exhale for a count of 3. Then she did, a controlled tide. She mouthed one word to Moran. There. Moran moved with that cop-slow speed that reads as kindness until it becomes a tackle. He positioned himself on the knob side. Dupre took the hinge side. They counted without sound. Moran turned the knob and pulled. The door did not open. Dupre drove her shoulder low into the panel, and the old wood decided to be new and gave with a crack that sounded like an ankle breaking far away. The space beyond was small, angled, cluttered, with things families save because they carry stories in them. A fan with no blade, a suitcase with travel stickers that meant Paris had existed once for someone in this house. 3 plastic bins of children's clothes marked in black marker, a broken chair that had not given up, and a person, folded into the angle between floor and pitch, knees under chin, face turned away from the light, hands empty and ready to lie about it. Dupre said, "Do not move." Moran said, "Show me your hands." The person did not show their hands. They lifted their left shoulder like someone about to stand in a narrow coffin, and then realized there was no way to both stand and not be seen. They kept their face turned. A smell came from the small hot space that was not attic smell. It was sweat and wool and rain and a cologne Ione could not name but would recognize for years in crowds and feel a short-lived lightening in her spine. The person finally shifted enough for the light to catch their cheekbone. Smooth, young, the jawline of someone who still believes they can sneak back to the version of themselves that did not make this choice. Dupree reached. The person flinched, then stilled. Moran took the wrists, quick. Plastic cuffs clicked, and Saturday. The person whispered one word so fast and so quiet, it sounded like a sound and not a word. Please. There are nights when a house rearranges what you know about it. There are nights when law and luck arrive at the same time and dress alike so you cannot tell who deserves the thank you. There are nights when children sleep through the loudest noises and wake to the softest ones. Breyer woke when Officer Dupre gently asked Ione if the boy had a favorite song she could sing while they stepped this stranger past his doorway and into a world that would be, for the stranger, smaller and heavier. Ione sang the lighthouse song, the boy rolled over, the girl sniffed twice, and then reclaimed her rabbit. The name given at the kitchen table later, with the cuffs off and the hands folded around a paper cup of tap water, was Corin Vale. He was 22, a barback at a music venue downtown, a part-time mover for a storage company on the edge of town, a person whose landlord had changed the lock that very afternoon because rent was late again, and who had wandered past the Harrow's house just after 9, watching rain stencil shadows on the porch. He said the front porch light was off, that the back alley light was the kind that made him nervous because it buzzed. He said he had once done a job in this very house, moving boxes after Maeve's mother passed, that he knew the crawlspace door did not always latch if you pushed too hard. He said all this in a way that sounded like memorized lines. Officer Moran left for a minute and returned with a small bag-tagged chain of custody. Inside, a multi-tool with a narrow flathead blade that would fit under a painted jam and lever it without much damage, a pair of cheap cotton gloves, damp, a folded postcard someone had intended to mail, featuring a lighthouse on the coast of Maine, and a note written in pencil that read, "We are well, love you, see you in December." The postcard had not been addressed yet. Corin looked at the lighthouse as if it had insulted him. "Why?" Officer Dupre asked. "Are you in a crawl space with a multi-tool?" Corin said he wanted to get out of the rain. He said he saw the back door wasn't fully latched. He said he knocked and no one answered. He said he stepped inside to be out of the weather. He said he heard children and then realized he had made a mistake and was trying to hide until he could unmake it. He said he had not gone near the bedrooms. He said he had not taken anything. He said most lies are just a breath away from the truth if you hold the breath long enough. The doorbell camera proved he had never rung. The back door, which Ione had locked after the raccoon, had not been forced, which meant the multi-tool had met the strike plate and learned a new way to talk. The thin condensation on the latch proved his face had been inches from the brass, as if he were listening through metal to weigh his chances. The damp hair on the hallway floor did not match Ione or the children. It matched Corin. The officers did not say poetry out loud, but sometimes evidence makes a poem whether or not you want it. Rowan and Maeve arrived at 10:28, windblown and wet, faces open with fear, and then with the specific relief parents make when they count the number of children and find the number unchanged. Maeve thanked Ione, then thanked Officer Dupre, then thanked the kettle for existing because it gave her hands something to do. Rowan walked to the base of the main stairs and looked up at the crawlspace door and put his hand on the newel post like a man greeting an old friend and apologized under his breath to the house for not knowing it needed him tonight. The rain slowed, the streetlight outside defined every leaf as if auditioning them for a brighter job. Corin Vale sat at the kitchen table and looked smaller and then larger and then smaller again, the way a person does when they realize they have chosen a story they cannot revise. He asked for a lawyer then, as was his right, and the night shifted into a new shape with paperwork and phone calls and the sound of zippers on evidence bags. Later, after the officers had gone and the house had been put back in order with all the rituals humans use to convince themselves the world is knowable, Rowan stood on the porch and stared at the street. A car hissed by, tires whispering on wet asphalt. Somewhere a train declared itself. He turned when Ione stepped onto the porch with 2 mugs of chamomile tea and the brittle, beautiful calm people make after the danger has taken its hands off their shoulders. He said thank you a dozen ways that did not use the word thank. She said, of course a dozen ways. That meant I am shaking on the inside, but I am still here. Maeve joined them, the porch light warming the edges of her hair, and the 3 of them stood in a small triangle like a warning sign no one else would read. When Maeve spoke, her voice had a new floor under it. We will change the locks. We will reinforce that door. We will move the postcard basket. We will install a sensor that turns on a light at the slightest motion. We will do the things that let us sleep. Ione nodded and did not say that sleep would come with its own sounds now. The sound of a breath behind a door. The sound of a latch fogging. The sound of a floorboard speaking the truth. There is a detail the police report will not mention, because police reports must make simple lines out of crooked nights. At 9:59, after sending the text to the wrong chat and before calling emergency services, Ione leaned her forehead against the cool plaster of the stairwell for the space of one heartbeat. She whispered something that was not quite a prayer and not quite a promise. Okay, if someone is up there, I will not be the person who opens the door and invites them in. I will be the person who names the danger out loud. Sometimes that is the whole difference. Not bravery that charges, but the steadiness that refuses to be tricked into being polite to danger. The next morning, the November sky tried on a bland blue and liked it. The town of Larkspur went back to the work of a Saturday. Kids in hoodies kicked at leaf piles. The bakery line wrapped twice around the counter. A woman in a gray coat standing by the river thought the water sounded like someone ripping silk very slowly and wondered who she would tell that to. Ione slept past noon and woke to a peanut butter text from Maeve, which read in that shaky grammar of gratitude, "Come by for dinner anytime. And also, I found your denim jacket on the porch swing. And also, there will be pie tonight if you want pie." She smiled and answered with too many thank yous and one yes to pie. She showered longer than she needed to, stood still in the water in a way that made time into a warm curtain, then dressed in gently clean clothes that smelled like detergent and a future. When she stepped outside, the air had that crisp, crisp edge. That means the first hard frost has already visited and left behind a postcard of itself on every windshield. Maple Ridge Avenue looked like an old movie taught to speak color. She walked past houses that had their curtains open a little wider than usual, past neighbors who held eye contact just a second longer, the way people do when the story has almost become a myth and they want to remind themselves it is still shaped like a person. On the Harrow's porch, there were new screws in the latch. The crawlspace door upstairs had a length of wood screwed diagonally across it like a stern eyebrow. A small motion sensor had been installed in the hall. It blinked a polite green and then went to sleep. The kids were in socks, sliding across the floor, laughing the laugh that children make the morning after a storm when the yard is new again. Rowan handed Ione a slice of apple pie on a paper plate and said again what he had said the night before, but with the daylight, making his voice warmer. You kept your head, you called, you stayed steady. That is the whole job sometimes. We will tell people that part when we tell them the story. Not who he was, not what he said, not the smell. We will tell them you named the danger and didn't let it decide your speed. The town told the story in its own ways. The newspaper, which had been saved from extinction by a stubborn editor named Lita Quinn, wrote a piece with the careful headline, "Babysitter's Quick Thinking Leads to Arrest in Overnight Burglary Attempt." The group chat learned, gently from Ione herself, that sometimes jokes congeal into myths, and myths can be mean. At the music venue, a bartender wiped the length of the bar 3 times, then once more, then stopped. At the storage company, a supervisor stared at a stack of moving blankets and tried to add up what the numbers meant about people. There is not a moral here, sharp and so clean it can cut bread. There is not an ending where everyone claps and the house resumes being only a house. There remains a door with a new diagonal board and screws that will loosen over time and be tightened again. There remains a boy who will ask, on a night 2 weeks later when rain drums the gutter, "Can you sing the lighthouse song one more time?" And a girl who will say, not the part where the foghorn sounds, that part sounds like a giant in the crawlspace. There remains a young man named Corin, whose first court date will arrive with a sky the exact color of the alley light, and who will have to decide whether to say the word sorry to the ceiling or to the faces in the room. At 9:58 on some future night, a phone will light in some other kitchen in some other town, and a person will type 3 words spaced out as if their thumbs had to be convinced. Who's upstairs? If you are that person, hear this story as a map of breath. Name the danger, make the call, keep your voice exactly as loud as it needs to be and no louder. Stand where you can see doors and hallways. Carry light. Remember that a latch that fogs is a sentence the house is trying to say. Let the sentence finish. If you are listening from a city, may the traffic outside be ordinary and honest. If you are listening from a farmhouse that knows every creek by its first name, May the wind be the only guest tonight. If you are listening in a small apartment where the neighbor's footsteps already live in your ceiling, may you learn the grammar of each tread so well that the first strange syllable tells you exactly what to do. The babysitter's last text was a question pointed upstairs, but the real end of the story is how she answered all the other questions pointed at her. Will you panic? Will you try to be polite when the moment calls for clear? Will you open a door because silence asked sweetly? She chose no, no, and no. She chose the shape of a steady voice on a thin line. She chose to be the reason the house could go back to being only wood and memory. Some nights, when she passes the Harrows by chance and the porch swing is still, she hears only the rain and the river, and that is enough. Some nights, she hears the old door upstairs settle as the heat kicks on and thinks, with a small smile, that even a house can be taught to breathe more quietly. And on the better nights, every window along Maple Ridge holds a square of light cut, perfect as a fresh slice of pie, and the street keeps its watch, and the children sleep so deep the world could rewrite its rules, and they would wake to the new rules fresh and ready to be memorized. If that happens where you are, tell me when. Tell me what the air smells like. Tell me the hour, spoken slowly so the world cannot run away with it. Tell me if the latch on your upstairs door is dry and dull or a little fogged from someone's breath. Tell me if you are holding a mug with a hairline crack that looks like a river map. Tell me if the house has taught you any of its words. And if your phone lights at 9:58 and the message reads as simple and terrible as a knock, remember the kitchen in Larkspur and the steady girl in the denim jacket, and say out loud to no one and to everyone, not tonight, not on my watch, not in this house. The road that GPS refuses to map, locals avoid it. They call it Limestone Cut on county maps, but no map app will take you there. Not in daylight, not at 3 in the morning, not even if you stand at the mouth of the lane with full bars and beg your phone like a superstitious traveler. The line of asphalt slips off Route 27 near the Ohio River, just past a caved-in orchard and a billboard for a roadside Jesus that no longer stands. In person, the turn is ordinary. On a screen, it is missing, as if the road and the world had decided to keep a small secret between them. Before we begin, tell me where are you listening from and what time is it there? This is in southeastern Ohio, down in Gallia County, where the hills go soft and the river carries towboats like patient thoughts. The year was 2022, late September. Goldenrod along the guardrails. Soybean fields gone the color of toast. I drove there on a Friday after work because a listener named Thayer Lorne had written to me with a subject line that felt like a dare. The road your GPS refuses to map. Locals avoid it. Please come before the county pours gravel again. Thayer was not a crank. She taught second grade in a brick school with a playground that leaned into a sycamore's shade. She coached a Lego league. She used the word prudent in a way that made you want to be. Her email listed dates and names the way people list ingredients. 2 wrecks in 2 years, 1 missing signage, 1 strange call to the sheriff's office just after midnight in late June. She did not say haunted, she said wrong. I left Columbus at 4:30 with a thermos of coffee and a box of gas station crackers and the kind of optimism you only get on a 2-lane infall. South on 23, east on 35. The sun slung low behind me, the way good music hides its effort. By 7:15, I rolled past Vinton's courthouse with its white clock face turning the hour into a suggestion. I kept the radio quiet. In the passenger seat, the county plat book rode buckled like a fussy child. I could feel the river before I could see it, the way the air saturated and the smell of damp earth put its hand on your shoulder. I reached the turn at dusk. Limestone Cut was marked by a county sign that had once been green and was now a speculation. A locked gate blocked a gravel spur to the right, but the paved lane went on unbothered, as if all gates were for other people. My phone sat in the cup holder, showing me nothing. The blue line ended in a gray shrug. I tried 3 apps. Same shrug. The plat book said the road existed, had always existed, and ran 2 miles east to a decommissioned ferry landing that had not seen a ferry since 1978. The app said, find another way. Thayer's warning lived in my pocket. Locals avoid it after dark. They say it runs warm. They say it has more turns than it used to. They say tires squeal on dry asphalt without your foot agreeing. The first 100 yards were ordinary: willow and ash, an old fence stapled to posts that leaned like tired men at a bus stop. The air smelled faintly of limestone and wet leaves. Then the temperature did a small, undeniable thing. It rose. Not a gust, not a patch of sun through trees, a steady, even climb that lapped over my forearms and stayed. I glanced at the dash. Outside temp read 64, rising to 68, then 71. The date on the dash glowed September 23rd. The time said 7:47 and slipped to 7:50 without being asked. I lowered the window to let the river air in. The warm beat met the cool and negotiated a truce that left sweat at my hairline. A bend. Another. The road narrowed until it felt like a confession. The trees grew close enough to see where vines had taught them to bow. I rolled slower. A small bridge came into view, wood deck, steel truss. A sign nailed to a poplar announced one lane in letters that had been painted by someone who believed in understatements. Beyond the bridge, the road ripple curved through a cut so tight the rock faces wore each other's dust. I stopped before the bridge, because I am not brave so much as careful. I set the hazard lights flashing red into green. I listened. A train whispered somewhere upriver. Crickets laid a steady carpet of sound over everything. From the cut, a thin metallic note like cooling machinery. The warm air possessed a sweetness I could not name immediately. Jams and canning season came to mind. Then the word arrived. Apples. Not Honeycrisp and not cider. Fallen apples. Ferment thinking about becoming something else. I took my notebook and recorded the details the way you do when you want the future to trust your memory. Time, temperature, smell, no wind, no other cars. Then I drove across the planks and felt the boards answer the tires like a breath under my feet. The cut rose. The hill pressed close. A corner went tighter than it looked on the approach. My rear tires slid a fraction, not enough to call it a slide, enough to make my throat say a quiet word I would not put in print. The steering wheel thudded softly, as if there were two wheels telling me two slightly different stories about straight. I eased. I took the next bend slower. There is a point in a road where the land decides whether you are a guest or a problem. Limestone cut decided I was a slow guest and tolerated me. The warm air leveled at 76, then climbed another couple of ticks. The smell of apples deepened into something like a recipe: cinnamon without spice, yeast without bread. I passed a turnout with two straight ruts that led into grass and ended at a log older than my car. A shape hung from a branch ahead. I braked. It was a memorial, crossed from cedar rails wired together, silk flowers that had learned to be brave in rain, photos in a sleeve of plastic tacked below a name printed on glossy paper. Mireille Pasque, 19, a date in October 2020. Below it, a line her father must have chosen: the road that brought you home. I got out. The heat met me like a body. My phone tried to show me bars, then tried not to. A moth hit the hazard light and changed its mind. I stood with my hands in my pockets and felt the place balance itself on me. When I turned across the road, I noticed another set of flowers half hidden in blackberry cane. The name blew up at me when wind finally remembered how. Osric Vales, 21, May 2021. Same line. The road that brought you home. I walked farther along the cut until it opened like a sigh. The lane flattened to a seam along a scrim of meadow that used to be something else. You can tell by how grass lies. If it grows with a memory of rose, something stood there before. The sky went the color of a bruise, deciding between night and purple. A light flickered ahead, low and steady. I squinted. Not a house, not a car, a lantern, rope handle, old-fashioned glass with its bubbles catching the last light. It swung at the mouth of a driveway, if driveway is what you call two parallel lines of dirt that remember wagons. A woman stood a few feet back from it in a denim coat and boots that had done more than look good. She raised a hand. Not a stop, exactly. A hello shaped by caution. "You are going the wrong way," she said. Her voice had small-town plainness, and age that could have been anywhere between 35 and 55 because work makes a music of people that is hard to date. She nodded to my car. Turn around at the lane. There is no place to swing up ahead. It goes to water and then to nothing, and the bank will be slick after last night. I introduced myself. I said my name and the name of my show. Her face did not change. She untied the rope from a dogwood sapling and brought the lantern closer. The glow put a field of gold on her cheek. You are the radio girl, she said, not unkind. Thayer told me you were coming. She said you are polite. She looked at my tires. I would go back before you go forward. The ferry road has two corners that do not know they are corners, and if you slide there, you will spend the night with your axle thinking about consequences. I asked her name. She said Tamsin Holt. She kept a hand wrapped around the lantern handle, as if light were something you hold to keep it from leaving. She pointed to the bank of the cut where the rock shouldered out above us. Hear that, she said. The rock under here runs with water. Not springs exactly. Leaks from the old drain gallery. The county drilled holes so the slope would get lighter and the holes steam and fall. The air warms, the road sweats. It is not witchcraft. It is a bad idea. We keep pretending we'll dry out. Her lantern threw small moons into the glass of my windows. A flock of nighthawks cut a pattern above the trees. The warmth wrapped the throat more than the skin, which is how you know it belongs to breath or rot. Tamsin tilted her head toward the river. You cannot see it from here, but it sits too close. When the ferry ran, the road came straight to the ramp. They moved the river to suit the men, and the river said, fine, I will move the bank to suit myself. And it has been a conversation since. Why will no app draw it? I asked. She shrugged slowly, as if some questions wore heavy coats. I heard it was a break in the public line after the flood in 2004 when the county closed it to repair the approach and never told the machines they had opened it again. I heard the maps blacklisted the coordinates when a mother drove into the river by following a robot voice that said, continue. I heard a man who knows about things sent an email to a company that said, please leave it off. We are tired of retrieving tourists and their courage. The people who make those clouds of roads do not live here. They live inside a different weather. Her hand flicked lightly at the memorial. Myre was my niece. Osric was her friend. They swung through here in a rain they thought would stay light. One slid, then the other came to help and turned around on land that looked like land and was not. The bank changes in a storm. The river is a liar that tells the truth when it feels like it. We stood with our feet on a road that wanted to be water. Time thinned. The lantern made a small island. Crickets sang as if the night were not worried about us at all. Thayer told me, locals avoid it, I said. Tamsin laughed once, a dry wire of a laugh that had carried heavier things. Locals avoid it when they are smart. Some are not smart all the time. Sometimes I am not. Sometimes I stand at the ferry mark and listen to the buckles tick when the night cools them and tell my mother out loud that it is time to put the kettle on. She died 2 winters ago, and still I tell her. She put 50 years into this hill. The hill speaks her name when the wind is slow. You will make a story and it will be tidy, and the road will keep doing what it has done since horses learned to trust it. It will take what you said on it if you hurry. I asked if I might walk to the landing with her. She considered my shoes and the angle of the hill and the slick of wet in the lantern's light. She nodded once. We left the car with hazard lights, confessing my bad choice to whoever came next. We walked with the lantern and our breath and the warm in our faces until the dark gave us what it was holding. A low lip of concrete with bolts that had once held a chain, a post with rings that had carried ropes heavy with river. The river itself turned its blank face up and said nothing. Across the water, 3 lights ran tin-tin along a ridge. Behind us, the hill kept its gravity like a rule book. Tamsin set the lantern on the ramp and crouched. See here. She pointed with a patience that came from knowing a place by its mischief. The asphalt meets the pour with no shelf. In summer, fine. In rain, gone. The silt builds a veneer. Your tire thinks it is road, your foot thinks it is time to turn, then you are signing a form you do not remember. She stood, the lantern painting the underside of her chin. You will want to say the road is cursed. It is not. It is low. There is a difference. Low places keep things. Heat, fog, news. people's stories when they cannot carry them anymore. This one keeps a kind of warmth that does not belong to weather. It comes from the hill and the old galleries drilled in 1952 when the county had money from a federal thing and men believed rock would behave. Rock behaves like a teenager with a kind heart. It tries until it does not. We walked back, not slow and not fast. The road felt different even in the short space between the landing and the cut. In the notebook of my body, I wrote a line I could not read until later. The turns here remember another set of hands on the wheel. I had the sense, foolish but insistent, that there are more curves than there used to be, and that the road will add one for anyone who comes distracted. At the car, Tamsin lifted the lantern again and said the thing I had not wanted to hear because it was the only thing that mattered. Do not publish the directions. If a person knows, they know, and they approach with respect. If they do not, their phone will talk them out of it and we will save work. Write about the heat. Write about the girls who keep silk flowers alive in rain. Write about how the river and the county have a conversation in October no one else gets to hear. But do not draw a map for the kind of curiosity that leaves us with Sunday morning calls. I promised her. I meant it. She nodded, then lifted the lantern to her face and blew gently so the flame leaned and stood again. Then she said the softer thing that made me like her. If you need to end your story, end it with a sentence that knows how to sit down. The road is still here without your sentence. I will walk it tomorrow with my sister and tell her about the way our mother scolded mud. That will be the end that matters. We said goodnight the way people say it when they know they will see each other in a grocery aisle soon enough. I turned the car in a careful crescent and returned over the bridge that knocked the tires politely 3 times. At the first straight stretch, I stopped and turned off the engine and the lights and sat in the dark, letting the warm air forget me. The smell of apples and limestone and old rain moved through the open window like a slow parade. Far off, a coyote made a cracked sound and then decided not to continue. I wrote in the notebook by the dash light. 8:54, 75 degrees, crickets, no wind, 1 moth, determined. On the way back to Route 27, a truck came around the curve with someone from here at the wheel. He lifted 2 fingers from the top of the wheel in that rural benediction. Eyes steady. I answered in kind. We passed without incident. My phone found a signal and rushed to tell me things I did not need. I turned it face down. The river kept its counsel. I stayed at a motel with a door that opened to the parking lot and a shower that sprayed like a hose with a grudge. At 11, I lay on the bed and listened to the highway need the night. I dreamed a dream that did not need translation. I drove the road in June in a rain that put a lid on the world. I felt the turn that did not know it was a turn. I saw silk flowers underwater moving like they were alive. When I woke at 3, the room was hotter than it should have been. I set the thermostat down, it huffed, I opened the door, and the night came in like medicine. In the morning, I met Thayer at a diner with a pie display that could make you forget your name. She wore a sweater with elbows that had done more thinking than most elbows. She brought a paper yard sale sign with a hand-lettered arrow pointing left. She set it on the table next to the sugar caddy as if it were a relative. When the waitress poured coffee, Thayer said we used to put these at the turn because apps would not and people would stop right there in the lane with the river in their trunk. The county asked us not to. Said it increased liability. Now we wave and we hope. You saw Tamsin. I did, I said. She told me not to draw a map. Good, Thayer said. Her mouth set around the word like a decision. I asked about the calls to the sheriff's office. She had copies. Public record after someone redacts the parts that hurt. One at 12:04 a.m. in late June. A voice breathing hard. Can you send someone to the ferry road? I do not know if I am on a road. The operator asked for cross streets that did not exist. A second call at 12:12. Same number, a different voice. We got her. We need a tow, not an ambulance. No injuries. No one drinks on a Thursday in this county, not like that. Thayer told me stories that were not mine to take without permission. The woman at the landing had taught Sunday school for a decade and could thread a needle in a moving truck. The boy in the BlackBerry cane had planned to enlist and then to come home. The ferry used to carry school buses and funeral processions, and once, in 1964, a parade float for the county queen when the bridge upriver closed for repairs. The operator had a name like a hymn, Dolan Pike. He took quarters with a smile and never wrote them down, and the county forgave him because he put back the difference out of his pocket at Christmas. At noon, I drove back once more because leaving is easier if you say the goodbye that feels like a choice. The day stood warm, even without the night's peculiar swell. The cut reflected a brightness that made the dashboard look cleaner than it was. I idled by the memorials, rolled down the window, and said the names out loud once each. Myray, Osric. The air did not change. The river kept the same tone of voice. A kingfisher strafed the bank and laughed meanly at an idea it did not respect. At the leveling in the trees, a county crew had set cones. 3 workers stood with a clipboard, a shovel, a rope to measure where the bank thought it should be. One of them wore his safety vest open, and the white undershirt said he had been at it since 7. He pointed at the asphalt and drew an invisible curve in the air, as if to show the piece of road how to round itself properly. Another squatted and peeled brittle weeds from a crack like string cheese. The third looked up when I slowed. He lifted a hand, the rural benediction again. I could not tell if he was welcoming me or telling me to go around. I went around. I kept the tires on the places that saw tires last time. You want a reason a road does not show up on a phone? Choose one. Bureaucracy, liability. A digital map made by a company that is afraid of being named in a lawsuit cannot afford local color. A dataset that drops a line because a county closes a gate for a week, a volunteer editor who got spooked, or the oldest reason, because the people who live there asked, and the people who make maps sometimes listen. Here is the part you can keep if you are the kind of person who needs a rule. If locals avoid a road, do not decide you are immune to their reasons because you are careful. Be careful at the places where land forgets itself. Warm air on a cool night means a stone or a story is breathing, and you should give it room. If a turn looks straighter than it is, it belongs to water or to someone else's memory. If you smell apples on limestone in September where no orchard stands, that is the hill reminding you this was a farm before your car was an idea. I drove away before dark because I had promised. The 2-lane lifted me back toward the highway like a kind hand on a back. The plat book lay open to a page that showed a thin, gray line stopping shy of the river. I did not pencil it in. Some lines stay honest by remaining incomplete. Months later, when the episode aired, people wrote to tell me about roads in their own counties that maps pretend not to know. A road in Vermont that snowplows leave until last and hikers take in June only. A road in East Texas that turned to soap in rain and led to a bridge a paper mill had once owned. A road in western Pennsylvania that slid a few inches each season until the houses leaned into one another like a wedding party after the toast. None of them wanted directions. Most wanted me to say out loud the thing they already believed. A map is a promise made by someone who cannot know your exact night. I went back in winter. The river carried skim ice, and the air had lost interest in warmth. Limestone cut breathed only rock, careful and slow. The memorials wore new ribbons that made color out of gray. Tamsin's lantern hung from a nail in her shed, unlit but ready. I parked on the turnout and watched for a long minute. No cars, no lights. Only the slow heave of a place that will outlast the names you put on it. If you ever find yourself at a turn your phone refuses to bless, do this. Put the device in the glove box, roll down your window, call the place by the names you were given by people who have rinsed dishes there. Listen for a warmth that belongs to stone or rot or story. Ask if you are a guest or a problem. If the answer takes too long, turn around, go home. Let someone else keep the road for you until you've earned it. Limestone Cut still runs from 27 to the water. Myray and Osric still own 2 small pieces of shoulder where silk flowers learn new weather. The ferry still waits in the old bolts when fog pulls the river toward the bank. The apps still refuse, which feels like respect finally performing something like wisdom. The locals still avoid it after dark, and you can call that superstition if you want. I call it the way people learn to live with a story that does not need their approval to keep going. Wherever you are, whichever hour you gave to this, hear this as you put the kettle on or slip your keys into a dish. A road can be true and not be for you tonight. Let that be a comfort and not an insult. The land does not need your footsteps or your tires to remember its lines. It is enough to name the warmth, bow to it the way you might bow to a neighbor, and step back into the lit part of the map where your house pours light through a window like a square of mercy. The 911 call that came after the funeral. They folded the flag for him at the little brick church on Ellsworth Avenue, and the wind tried to take it twice before the honor guard's hands persuaded it to behave. It was a raw Thursday in late January in a river town in southeastern Ohio, the kind of cold that makes sound travel farther than sense. The man in the casket was Eamon Ridge, a volunteer firefighter and the sort of neighbor who shoveled 2 extra porches without mentioning it later. The service ended at 4, the last handshake landed at 4:20, and by nightfall, the street had gone back to being only a street. At 9:13, Leora Penn took her seat at the county dispatch console, slid on her headset, and watched the board come alive. At 9:31, the line marked 911 flashed with a familiar number. His number, the man everyone had just buried. Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Leora had fielded storms and barn fires, and wrong turns called in as kidnappings. She had coaxed calm from people whose words came like hail on a tin roof. She had heard the first breath of a baby through a phone held in shaky hands, and the last breath of a stranger who needed someone to hear it. She was 34, kept her hair short to keep the headset from snagging, and wore a gray cardigan because the room ran cold to keep the computers honest. Her desk held 2 photographs wedged into the bezel of the monitor. One showed a river in summer, green as a promise. The other showed Eamon and his daughter Cass standing in front of the station engine with that look people get when duty gives them a reason to grin. The year was 2022. The county had upgraded the system, and the board pulsed with the soft light of new money that still felt like a borrowed suit. Lines identified towers and cross streets. Repeat callers had little tags. When Eamon's number flashed, it wore the tag she had put on it a year ago, Station 4. Her stomach made a small, foolish turn. Her hand did not. She tapped the line open. 911. What is your emergency? Static, not empty. The kind of static that carries weather in its mouth. A faint hiss like tires on wet asphalt far away, then a click as if someone had covered the microphone with a thumb and lifted it again. Leora glanced at the automatic location box. The system offered a circle that could have been a dozen blocks wide and no more. The tower showed the bluff above the river. The timer on the call rolled past 10 seconds, then 15. The headset warmed in her hand. "Hello," she said, voice even, the way training turns fear into architecture. "If you can speak, I am here." Something moved under the static. A breath, slow, disciplined. The way firefighters learn to breathe through a mask like they are rationing the ocean. She had listened to Eamon for years as he called in traffic stops and barn smokes and mutual aid requests in that unshowy voice he kept, even when the ceiling thought it was tired of being a ceiling. Her throat tightened without permission. The board did not care. It kept time. The night supervisor, Brandt, rolled his chair closer, not touching her cord. He was 50, part-time philosopher, full-time keeper of snack drawers. His eyebrows asked a question he did not give words to. Leora tapped a note onto the incident log with deliberate fingers. Caller number displays as decedent from earlier funeral. Open line. Faint audio. Possible misroute for memorial device. Possible spoof. Monitor. Eamon, she said quietly, because sometimes names open doors the way keys do. If you can hear me, give me any sound. The line breathed once more, then found a voice. Not bright, not ghostly, a man speaking like someone who had walked all day and only now remembered he could sit. It said one sentence, 3 words, patient, back door locked. Brandt's hand hovered over the radio mic. Leora nodded once. He paged Station 2 because Station 4 was morning, and Station 2 would show up with their coats half buttoned and their hearts arranged like a team. He sent them to the Ridge home on Quince Street, the small white place with a porch swing that had never let a guest feel foolish for needing to sway a minute. Leora kept her voice on the line. Back door, locked, she repeated, writing it, hearing it, feeling the way the sentence wanted to be a map. Is someone inside? Nothing answered at first. Then a second sentence, softer. Cass asleep. Brant's fingers were already moving the way piano players do when the song makes them want to be faster than they are. Officers on the midnight swing shifted their routes without complaint. The medic crew out of town angled their rig toward Quince in case Grief had found a trick that needed medical names. Leora sent a quick text to the on-call clergy liaison because the county did not believe in letting families be alone with what they could not name. Amen, she said, steady. We're sending them. Stay with me if you can. The line hissed like rain on a steel roof, and then went quiet. Not the click of a hang-up, the kind of quiet a room makes when a story finally sits down. The call timer rolled to 1 minute 23 seconds, then stopped. Disconnected, the board told her, cheerful as a toy that believes its work noble. Brant opened his mouth and then closed it. He reached for his coffee and decided it was the wrong kind of night for coffee and reached for water instead. Leora sat very still for a moment and felt the way adrenaline stands up in your body and refuses to sit until you give it a task. She gave it the task of listening. The lines danced with ordinary need. A possum in a kitchen. A husband who had cut his hand on a jar. A neighbor who had heard a window break and then realized it was the television. Her hands did their work. Her ear held a room for the line that had gone quiet. Officer G. Park radioed in first. Voice crisp. Tires crunching on salt in the street. Unit 3-1. Quince Street. Back porch light on. Back door indeed locked. Copy request to knock. Copy, Leora said, hearing her own voice make simple shapes. Proceed. There are knocks that sound like questions and knocks that sound like the start of a fight. Officer Park knocked like a person who has played in a string quartet. Firm, meticulous, willing to wait between knocks. Leora heard the long, thin silence on the open radio channel that means everyone has decided to breathe in sync. A porch swing creaked, whether from wind or memory. Then Park again, softer. Visual on subject in living room. Teen. Asleep on couch. Television on mute. No visible distress. We are making entry. Park called the locksmith number taped to his visor, because there is always one, and he also called the small cheat that officers inherit, which is to lift the back door on its tired hinges when you turn the key the wrong way. The door opened, a floorboard confessed itself. Park moved through a small kitchen that smelled like heat and spice and thyme. He said, quiet as a blessing, Cass, it's G, it's me. The girl woke with that rough sound grief makes when it has only just let go for half an hour at last. Back door, Park said into his shoulder mic. Locked, now secured. Subject breathing, oriented, tearful, says she fell asleep and forgot the back after the last aunt left. She says her dad would have said it. She says she heard him say it sometimes, even when he was alive, when she forgot. I'm locking up, then staying here until her aunt returns. The call had been the little bridge a county makes when one house cannot manage all its doors alone. Leora typed. She logged, she breathed. She answered a call about a siren that would not stop on a fire alarm panel, which is a call that can ruin a night or return it to its usable shape. She told Brant she needed 30 seconds, stood up from her console, walked to the stainless sink by the break room door, and washed her hands as if she had been in a kitchen that required respect. At 10:48, the line lit again. Same number. The board did not know how to feel about that and chose its usual indifference. Leora took it. 911. A voice lives inside a headset after a while. The nerves learn routes, the body decides where to keep the sound. The phrase came through low and clear. Basement. Pilot light. She did not hesitate. She sent the fire crew already on Quince next door. She told Park. She told the aunt, who had come breathless from her own house 3 blocks away. that they were going down the cellar stairs for the little square of flame that keeps a winter from doing more harm than good. She heard Cass in the background say, without fright, he always listened to the furnace like it was trying to tell him a joke. Engine 3 called in. Pilot light out. Gas smell minimal. Windows open. Relit. Carbon monoxide monitor registers safe. A firefighter Rowe, who had once done stand-up for exactly 2 open mic nights, and then decided his comedy belonged in the bay with his coworkers, added gently, "Whoever called this in has good ears." The board calmed, the town kept its little noises, the river told the ice what to do, and the ice obeyed or not. Leora's shift slid past midnight. At 1:19, she poured tea she did not want and drank it because warm things are a kind of law. At 1:40, an old man reported a woman knocking on his side door asking for a light, and she sent Park and his partner again, and it turned out to be a neighbor who had locked herself out, and they laughed about solutions and did not mention grief, so it would not be tempted to take that house too. At 2:19, when the dispatch room feels like a lighthouse that forgot whether the bay is wide or just an eager creek, the line lit a third time. Leora did not say amen out loud. She let the humanities teacher voice in her head that once told her names have heft say it for her. 911. This time the sentence was longer. Not elaborate, not difficult. The kind of sentence men say when they've spent their lives making tool lists. Check the pan on the back burner. Leora's fingers moved before she could tell them to, and 10 seconds later, Park said on the radio that a pan of oil sat glowing on the stove, forgotten by a cousin who had come bearing food, and then wept, and then gone to call another cousin and set the phone down on the porch rail. Park killed the burner, slid the pan onto a cold eye, and said, "Tell whoever's on that line thank you again." She said, "I will," and understood how inadequate that was, and also how there is no better sentence at 2:20 in the morning when a house has been held upright by 2 extra words spoken by a man with no air left to push them. By dawn, the calls had slowed to their usual winter trickle. The board made its little satisfied beeps, the shift change crept near. Leora printed the overnight logs for the lieutenant in charge and set them in the bin with the neatness of a person who believes paper is a form of kindness. She took off her headset, set it on the hook, and let her neck decide it had been a stiff night. On her drive home, the river looked like a sheet of hammered tin under a sky that had not yet decided whether to blush. She stopped at the corner store for milk and oranges. The clerk rang her up and asked if she had been at the funeral, because everyone had been at the funeral, even if they had not parked their bodies in a pew. Leora said yes, and the clerk said he had known Eamon since they were boys, back when the river took 2 boys and gave back 1, and how the one who came back had never raised his voice again, unless it was to make a frightened kid laugh in a smoky basement. Leora listened. The clerk put 2 extra oranges in her bag, the way men do when they feel the night reach its hand into the room and cannot keep all the light from leaving. She slept until noon and then sat in her kitchen with the radio low and the blinds open to teach the afternoon how to behave. Her phone chimed with a message. It was Cass. Leora had given her number to the aunt without thinking, and nothing about this felt like a boundary violation now. The message was a picture of a backdoor lock and a caption. "He did it again, thank you." She replied, "You did it." He reminded, "That is a team." Cass sent back a heart in the color teens choose when they mean it and do not want to seem silly. Word traveled without gossip's teeth in it. People told each other the version they could bear. Some said the call after the funeral had been a trick of towers, an echo, a message scheduled by a grieving mind that had set a reminder on a phone. Some said Eamon was still doing his rounds, making sure pilot lights and pans behaved. The chaplain said he did not know the mechanics of it and did not care, that love gets to serve in whatever uniform it likes. The fire chief said quietly to Leora, "If my number ever lights your board and I am not in a position to help myself, send the crew. I will not be offended if you use my name to get them there faster." It is Wannon. The next week brought the kind of snow that erases the edges of things. Leora worked 3 overnights in a row and learned to sleep in squares of 4 hours like a cat. She took a call from a man who had found his wife on the floor and guided him to count and compress, and the medics arrived before the counting rasped the hope out of his voice. She took a call from a woman who had locked herself in a bathroom because her boyfriend had stopped being gentle, and she kept the woman talking about the photograph on the wall while the officers climbed the stairs two at a time. She did not think about the line until it lit again 2 Fridays later at 1 in the morning. She kept her voice clean. 911. Eamon's voice came again, thinner, like a person speaking through a scarf. It said, in a tone part instruction and part apology, "Box of matches in the junk drawer beside the oven. Throw them out." She told Park. Park went. He opened the drawer and found a box that had wicked itself damp and mean. He took it to the back porch and soaked it and binned it, and then came inside and wrote a sticky note for Cass that read, "Your dad told on you." She woke to it and laughed in that shocked way laughter has when it has been given back its license to exist. Not every call was that kind. Once, the line connected, and all Leora could hear was faint wind and the hollow tick of a cooling engine, and she understood, without needing the lieutenant's later confirmation, that this had been the night the station bays opened, and Eamon's truck had been driven back from the long, slow procession, and the engine had clicked in that language. Machines use to admit fatigue. Once, the line carried only a sound, like boots on gravel, exactly 3 steps, then the pause of a man looking at a sky he used to know from a ladder truck. Once, nothing came at all, and still she stayed on the line the way you stay on a porch after a friend has gone inside, just in case one more sentence needs to come out and walk around in the air. Spring loosened the river. April made the churchyard look less stern. Cass finished school with a concentration that made her teachers write small notes on the bottom of her papers. "You have turned into a person who trusts herself." Leora saw her at the station on an open house Saturday, and the girl hugged her the way nieces do their aunts without asking for the right to be related. They stood under the engine bay's great door and listened to the way small kids treat sirens like musical instruments when given permission. Cass said she sometimes still heard it, the way a voice comes into a room without needing to open the door. She said the voice had told her to bring in the porch rug before a thunderstorm that would have flung it across the block. She said the voice had told her to drink water before her stomach had the language to beg for it. "What do you think it is?" she asked, not demanding that it be a ghost or an algorithm. "I think you live in a county where people answer one another when called," Leora said. "I think sometimes lines open from one room to another because the rooms were built that way by love. I think if we say it out loud too many times, the day will get shy and pretend it never happened. And I think your dad trained his whole body to go when someone needed a sentence, and I do not know what training looks like later. Thanks for watching Allen's To Help Pray." Cass nodded as if she had been offered advice about lifting with her legs, not her back. She put her hands on the engine's bumper like a kid checking the pulse of a whale and whispered thanks in the dull shine where she thought it might carry. The last call came in July, on a night that smelled like cut grass and the electric promise of storm. The board was quiet. Brant had his feet crossed at the ankle, the way he did only after midnight when the county behaved. The line lit. Leora took it with the care of a person accepting a candle in wind. 911. There was no static, no breath, only a single word, perfectly ordinary, soaked in a patience she would remember until the last hour of her life. Enough. "Enough what?" she asked, back straight, pencil ready. The word came again, a thought set gently on a table. Enough. Then a long exhale, the temperature of a day in which someone has put down a tool they are proud to have used and is ready to wash their hands. She typed the word. She did not send units. She did not mention it to Brant until the end of the hour, when she said it out loud the way you say a number twice to make sure you got it right. He nodded. He threw a cough drop to her like a baseball, and she caught it and laughed, because bodies insist on living. There were no more calls after that. The system reassigned numbers as systems do. The board forgot how to glow with that tag. When Leora sat at her desk and the photographs leaned against the monitor made their steady witness, she still sometimes heard the faint tap of a firefighter's gloved hand on a doorframe, the universal signal for ready. She bought a small, heavy key hook for her own kitchen, put it by the back door, and never forgot again. She found that when she walked past the Ridge place on mornings when she needed to see the river before she could trust the day, she would look at the back door and feel not a haunting, not an ache, but the exact rectangular comfort of a thing that had been understood and done. If this kind of thing ever happens where you live, if a phone rings after a set of shoulders in town have lowered themselves to the work of grief, if a name appears on your console that your heart wants to call impossible, do what Leora did. Answer. Stand in the narrow bridge between rooms, ask short questions with soft edges, send help, write down exact words. The world is made of exact words and the work that follows them. Believe nobody and nothing too hard. Let the river decide what is memory and what is rumor. And when the voice finally says enough, let your hands say thank you by resting them, palm down, on the desk you have kept clean so the night can put its weight there for a minute. And if you are sitting in your kitchen with a back door that gets forgetful, say the date out loud to bring the day to heal. Late January 2022. Early April 2022. The hot night in July when rain forgot its manners. Say the town's name so it will remember it has one. Say Amen. Say Cass. Say Leora. Practice the sentence that saved a pan and a pilot light in a teenager who deserved a house that understood locks. Back door locked. Then lock it, then sleep. The county will keep its watch. The river will balance its own ledger. Somewhere, a dispatcher you will never meet will lay a pencil down on a pad with a line drawn through the last open box, a small, perfect check that means this part of the night is finished and the next part may begin.